get to know you better. We appreciate your interest in this and your participation in this, which is truly an exercise in democracy. So we appreciate your coming and being here and taking part in this. I also want to especially thank the people of the Welcome Baptist Church for allowing us to use this facility tonight to have this meeting. They are not representing us. We're not representing them. Anything that we say or do here tonight should not be held against them if you don't like it. So, but we do appreciate their kindness in making it possible to have this venue to present a view that is quite different from what the school board has been telling us and trying to get all of us to swallow. So, again, we're thankful for that. I want to begin tonight by telling you a brief little story about a man named George Goldtrap. He was a TV weatherman in Nashville, Tennessee in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And if you've kept up with local TV weathermen, you're probably aware that a lot of them get to be pretty famous. You know, John Sessions, so to speak. And also, they figured out that there's a good way to make money too, because in their spare time they began to give speeches, and finally, you know, they get paid for the speeches, and so they would do that. And George was doing really well with that. In fact, one day he got a call from a charity group that was holding a meeting in New York City, a fundraiser. And so they offered that they would pay him if he would come up and pay his expenses and speak to the crowd. They were charging $1,000 a plate for the people who attended, so they were wealthy people, obviously. And so he went up there, and the night they met at the Waldorf Astoria, their ballroom, and had all these tables around, and it was a black tie affair, you know, a big deal. And so George took his place and sat down, and as they were beginning to serve dinner, they brought rolls and put it by, you know, a plate of everyone. And then they gave one little patty of butter to each plate. Well, George, being a southern boy, a country boy, he recognized immediately that one little patty of butter wasn't going to be enough. So he got the attention of the maitre d', as he was called, and says, so the guy finally came around and stood beside him, and he said, sir, and George says, I need some more butter. Can I have 2 or 3 more little patties of butter? And he stiffened up and he said, sir, we only allow 1 patty of butter per person. Well, George was kind of taken back. He said, I've never heard that before. He said, finally, he looked at him and he said, do you know who I am? And the guy said, no. He said, I'm George Goldtrap from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm on television there, and I have been paid to come here and speak to these people tonight, and they're paying $1,000 a plate to hear me speak. Well, the guy just kept looking at him, and he said, do you know who I am? And George said, well, no, I don't believe I do. You have me there. He said, who are you? He said, I'm the man in charge of the butter. I want you to keep that in mind because it's relevant to what we're talking about. I want you to remember tonight as we go through this that you are the person who is in charge of the butter. You get to decide who gets how much. And so keep that in mind as we go through our things tonight. Now let's talk numbers. $109 million. Have you heard that figure anywhere? Did you know that for $109 million you could buy 5,450 new economy cars out of $109 million? That would be a new car for almost every voter in District 55. You could also buy 13 million Happy Meals at McDonald's for that much. You could buy 54,500,000 gallons of gasoline for your car. You could buy 5 million pairs of jeans Walmart. You could buy 36 million loaves of bread, or you could spend the money for one unnecessary high school building in Lawrence County. Now the question is, how are you going to spend the money? And remember the butter story. You and I and the other citizens of District 55, we get to decide whether they get the money or not. And so we need to think about this when we talk about that amount of money. Now, tonight I want to spend a little bit of time discussing how we think about things in life. And that's very important. Most of us, particularly in the world today, we're easily distracted because of all of the stuff going on, aren't we? But when we have important issues to discuss and important decisions to make, we need to follow what I heard one time, a long time ago, and it has stuck with me ever since. And that is that in life, we need to keep the main thing as the main thing. We need to not be diverted to side issues. And as we discuss, not only now, but between now and the election, about the school bond issue, I want to remind you and warn you that there will be many people who are greatly interested in distracting you from the main thing about the school bond issue. And so we need to not be distracted by these things that are brought up. Now, let me mention a couple of things that sound so simple you think, well, any fool knows that, but apparently there's some who don't. A new building, which the district has proposed, is not a new school. A new building that costs a lot of money does not equal a better education. You see, we're in what is called a church building, aren't we? But what goes on here is what makes it a church, isn't it? I mean, we could be playing basketball in here. I bet I could dunk one here, but nevertheless, the building is not the school. And we have been trained to think that both the schools and churches, that the building, well, that's it. But it is not. It is what goes on in that building. A church that has $1 million building, does that mean they're way better than the people in the smaller building? Of course not. It's what goes on. So when the people talk about, oh, we need this new school building, we need the new one. No, that doesn't really have much to do with the school. It's what goes on in that building. So when we talk about the main thing and the issues, I found it interesting. I was thinking the other day about it. There are basically two sides in this question that people are facing. There are two groups of people who are somewhat organized and are trying to rally people to their point of view. There is the school board and the District 55 administration. They have formed little committees of 2 or 3 people who meet around this area, I believe. And in some of the meetings, they have other numbers. But they call their group this, FPAC. Now, when I saw that for the first time, I said, I know there has to be a government worker involved in that. They always like to talk in those letters. I remember one time when Linda and I first went and heard a political speech, and the person was a good guy that was talking, but he kept talking about the DEA and the ADA and the LPA and that, and Linda says, what in the world are they talking about? So government people, that's how they think, and that's how they speak. But the FPAC stands for the Facilities Planning and Advisory Committee. Now, I say to you tonight, and I can back it up, I'm sure, the school district has put out several things and made several statements that are just not accurate. So I give them credit, this one is accurate. Because it does describe where their focus is. Again, what does it stand for? Facilities, Planning, and Advisory Committee. Nothing in there about improving education, is there? They are focused, in fact, some might say obsessed, with the facilities, the buildings, the structures, rather than the educational process and content that goes on within a school. Now, our group, we call a Common Sense Coalition for Better Schools. Now, both of these groups, there have been letters to the editor on behalf of the school district in which both the board and the superintendent says, but now our main focus is on the children, on the education of the children. We are all focused on that. That's what we're all focused on. But about all they talked about is this new school building. While we talk about having a better school. We're not talking about buildings, we're talking about a better school. And so that's one of the distinctions. They are focused on the facilities. We are focused on the educational product that is produced in Lawrence County. Now, if the school board and the administration is truly focused on what is best for the children, why not focus on what goes on inside the school room? Things such as student safety, things such as discipline, which is a prerequisite to learning. You cannot have an institution of learning that is successful as far as students are concerned if you do not have discipline for the students.
That's right.
Thirdly, there needs to be real teaching. And when I say real teaching, I'm talking about basic fundamental things that every person needs to be taught. Science and math and reading and American history as it really happened, not as many people proclaim and believe today. That's what would be in the best interest of the children, not some grandiose building that may be built by someone. I wonder about that. What if the school board and the district administration, I don't know how much money they've already spent on this project that they are trying to ram down our throats. But it's not free what they're doing, I know. But what more could they have done if they had taken just that amount of money and say, you know, we're going to improve things inside the building that we have.
That's right.
We're going to get teachers and the principals and all on the same page, and we're going to get involved in real education of the students. And all of the time that they have spent promoting this around the county. How much better off would the children be? It is plain to me that their focus, though they profess it, and though some perhaps intend that, their focus is not on the children, it is on the building. Now, since we've talked about numbers, $109 million, and we're talking about the quality of education, I'd like to ask us to think about this for a couple of minutes. What are we getting for the money that we have already invested in the schools that we have in District 55? What are we getting for our money? Well, first of all, some of you may not be aware, but I want to run through the money that we have spent on the schools and are paying back for just in the last few years. In 1999, a $24 million bond issue was given to the Lawrence County School District to do some improvements on the elementary schools in the district, and also to build a new elementary school in Waterloo and some other things. $24 billion. In 2005, another bond was taken out for $39,465,000. That's just 12 years ago. That was for constructing, furnishing, equipping, additions, and renovations and making other improvements at the Lawrence District 55 High School, renovating and equipping projects around the district to make it more energy efficient, and paying some on debt that had larger interest rates. But the vast majority of that money went to District 55 High School. And then last year, they borrowed another $1.18 million to buy the building down on Hillcrest Drive so that we can have a huge amount of space for the district office people in District 55. Now, all of that money totals up to $64.5 million. That doesn't count the interest. And I don't know, you may not know it, and I think you do. But the school board probably doesn't seem to know it. But you don't borrow money without paying interest, do you? And generally speaking, I would say that this is a conservative estimate because I was unable to get the exact figures. Usually on a debt like that, about a third of the amount that you're borrowing also has to be added to it for interest. Sometimes it's more than that. Which would bring it to $85 million that the taxpayers of Lawrence County have paid, are paying, and yet will pay on this money that's been spent during this time period. So what are we getting for our money? Well, first of all, as I discuss this, I want to mention that I am not talking about the teachers being responsible for most of this. Most of the teachers, I believe, are good teachers, and they're trying hard, and they're working under difficult circumstances. They often don't have the backing that they need, and they're not allowed to do the things they know that work. So I'm talking about others in the school administration and things that come all the way from Washington on down. And you know, one of the things that disturbs me about a lot of local government is all of this crazy stuff that comes from Washington. When it comes, we complain about it, but then say, well, what can we do? You know, we got to do it. We got to go along. I'd like to hear some school board members and some principals and superintendents simply say, when they come up with some of this crazy stuff, we will not do it.
Amen.
These are supposed to be our schools, aren't they? We are the ones paying the bills. So we need to keep that in mind. Now here's what's going on. Generally, children are taught from early in school till they get out of school that they are the descendants of apes. That people are really just animals. This is what evolution is. And so children are taught that. And I often comment to my wife, you know, you see all of this stuff of kids rioting and stuff, and this goes on in college as well. And I said, you know, is it odd that you would teach children all of their life that they're animals, and when they start acting like one, that you would be surprised? Also, we have children today who are being taught and really pushed on the subject of climate change. And I know that's the fact because I know somebody that's out there, and I talk with him regularly, and